mourn is crucial to grief. People often talk about grief, the emotions attached to grief, but I don't think enough people talk about the mourning process and the importance of being able to have the right to mourn the way that you want to. And so it is with pleasure that I welcome Ian Henderson to our webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. It's nice to be here again. It's support and share is very special to me. I do about 3 of them every year. I've been doing this for 8 years now, and so this one is first time as a virtual. And Laurie was mentioning the Alan Wolfelt training that I did. I've been training with Alan for years now. And I'm just going to adjust this camera just a little bit if I can. I think that's a little better, right? So I lost a number of people in my life about 15 years ago. And I was looking for some grief support and I just couldn't find any. There just wasn't any around. So what I did was I started to look for resources that I could find. And I did find Alan Wolfelt down in the United States. And he's probably the best grief therapist more in North America. So I've studied with him, and he has this theory about Mourners' Bill of Rights. There's a difference between grieving and mourning that a lot of people don't know. So grief is your reaction to loss. It's your internal feeling to loss. And mourning is taking what's inside of you and moving it outside. And that's what bereaved families do so well. If we don't have bereaved families, honestly, I don't know what we do in the city. So I'm a massive researcher. I really like going deep into topics. Alan Wolfelt has his 10 Mourners' Bill of Rights that he feels we should all have, and I want to read part of that for you. I've since researched and added about 30 more, or maybe 40 more, and I'm going to highlight some and just share those with you. And if you have questions, feel free to share that. So this is how Alan introduced this when I was with him. Though you should reach out to others as you do the work of mourning, because mourning is never meant to be done privately. It's meant to be done with other people. You should not feel obligated to accept the unhelpful responses that you may receive from other people. You are the one who is grieving, and as such, you have certain rights no one should try to take away. So if I was to ask you, I know we were not chatting, but have you had anyone that gave you advice you didn't find helpful? And I know if I was in front of you right now, every hand would go up. And we'd have a few laughs and you'd tell me stories and things like that. So I'm just going to take a little sip of water here. It is water, by the way. So these are some of Alan's rights. And the first one is you have the right to experience your own unique grief. So this is your grief. It's no one else's, and no two people grieve the same way. So you have the right to do that, okay? And you have the right to talk about your grief. It's something you need to talk about. So talking about your grief will help you heal. So you need to seek out others who will allow you to talk as much as you want. That often means, by the way, going outside of your bubble, your close family unit, because they may not be grieving the same way that you are, okay? His third one is you have the right to feel a multitude of emotions, okay? So confusion, this is just some of the things you're gonna feel. Confusion, disorientation, and I could ask you how many of these you're feeling. Fear, guilt, and one of the ones people always ask me about a lot is anger. Is anger an appropriate emotion to have in grief? And I would say, yes, it is. Matter of fact, I'd be surprised if you don't have it. Because often people will say, they were too young, even if they're in their 90s or their 80s, people will say it was not the right time. It's just something that we tend to have a lot. So I would actually say anger is fine. And then we would certainly deal with it as it came up. You have the right to be tolerant of your physical and emotional limits. So you don't have to always be going out somewhere or accepting invitations, because people will try and keep you busy. I don't know if you've run into this yet, but people will say, you have to stay busy. So then I ask people, say, why would you say Why would people say that to you? Just think about that for a minute. Why would I have to stay busy? Well, if you stay busy, then you don't have to think about your loss. But if you don't think about your loss, you're delaying your grief. And you don't want to delay grief if you can help it. So I hope that kind of makes sense for you. Just a couple more of Alan's, and then I'll move on to a couple of others. You have the right to experience grief bursts. Now, a grief burst is out of nowhere, a powerful surge of emotion will just come up and you'll start to cry. And you're going to have these a lot near the beginning. You're going to have them probably for the first year, maybe the second year. You'll have them the rest of your life, because once you hear a song or have a smell that reminds you of that person, you may have these grief bursts, but as time goes along, they're not grief bursts anymore. I call them memory embraces, because that's just them kind of, I really feel it's them checking in with you, saying, here I am, I just thought I'd drop in for a minute. And it's a kind of a nice way to look at it. I'm still getting mail, by the way, for my wife, who died 15 years ago. And the first year when I was getting that mail, I was just getting really angry, and I was phoning people and saying, take her name off the list. Now when I get mail, it's a reminder that she actually existed. And I'll just take it and I'll give it just a little hug as I put it in the recycle bin, because I'm not going to open it, right? Grief bursts are quite common. You have the right to search for meaning. So if I ask you, how many of you have actually been asking why questions? Like, why me? Why now? Why this way? It's normal to ask questions that you will not get answers to. So people would say, well, why do you ask these questions? Because you're trying to search for meaning and make sense, and those questions are going to kind of diminish over time. But I hope you never hear from anybody where they say you don't ask questions like that, because they're a necessary part of you trying to make sense out of a nonsensical experience, right? That's really what that's all about. And I think that's the ones I had for Alan. And as I said, I'm a massive researcher, and I found a whole lot of people. There's a fellow in the States called Larry Barber. He's another grief therapist. And a couple of his are, you have the right to say time out. I don't know how many of you ever had timeouts with your kids. How many of you have ever had timeouts with your spouse? You can have a timeout with grief, where you just say, I've had enough right now and I need a day away from this. You do not have to be grieving every day if you don't want to, okay? You have the right to remember and honor your loved one through memories and your actions every day. So you can be having things that remind you of the person. You should not be in any rush to get rid of tools or clothes or cars, or I also do pet loss quite a bit, and I've quite a bit of experiences with people who keep saying, I can't get rid of this and this and this. I said, don't, just hold on to them for a while, and then down the road we'll take a look at that. So remember and honor your loved one through memories and your actions every day. Hopefully, I would recommend that you don't build monuments. That's kind of carrying it to an extreme. So I've seen one person about 5 years ago that hung up 150 pictures in their living room, where you couldn't even see a piece of wall. The idea was they wanted to be surrounded by their loved one, and we did leave that for quite a while. But over time, she started to reduce those. But sometimes we're just looking for memories, right? You have the right not to be rushed through your grief. So if I was to ask you this question, how long does grief take? We get this question a lot. How long does grief take? And the answer to that is, it takes as long as it takes. So we can't look at one person and look at another person and say it's going to be this date, because I get this when I start working with people. I want to know the date when I'm going to start feeling better. I say, I can't give you that. And then what's the point of us doing this, right? You have the right to an occasional bad moment or bad day. So I would ask you that. As you're healing, are you finding you're having a good day, followed by maybe another decent day, followed by a bad day, followed by what I call a tsunami day. So a tsunami is where these waves of emotion pretty well just carry you away. And you're gonna have those. And I want to explain that a little further down in the presentation. It's so misunderstood, just these emotions. You have the right to let tears flow. If I was talking with you and you started to cry, I'd say, good for you. And I hope you are crying. I get a lot of people that think tears are a sign of weakness, when in reality, it's just the opposite. Tears are a sign of strength. It's kind of like liquid love that you had for your loved one, right? You're missing them big time. Nothing in our life ever prepares us for losing someone we love. And if you have more than one, my history is I had 5 very dear people to me all die within 14 months. And that's where I went out looking for help, and luckily I found some. You have the right to mourn in places and with people that make you feel safe, comforted, encouraged, and cared for. Part of my love for bereaved families is just watching what they do, how well trained their people are, their facilitators. I come in there, I feel welcomed, I feel cared for. I'll tell you, because of the pandemic, I guess, what's going on right now, I do go out and walk whenever I can. And it's really neat to see people actually waving from the distance and actually sharing, and you feel cared for. It's really fascinating. I think there's some good things going to come out of this, right? We have the right to understand that grief is slow, hard work, and to move through it at our own pace. Don't ever compare yourself with someone else. So you might look at someone else and say, boy, they seem to be doing really well. Or maybe they are. But it's your journey, and we never know how long that's going to take, right? This is one I wrote personally. We have the right to forgive ourselves for the things we think we should have done or might have done, and realize that what we did in that moment of time was based on the information that we had at hand, and we did the best we could with the knowledge we had. It's so predictable for people after a death to start looking back and then finding reasons for you to be guilty. I regret this, I feel guilty about that. And in reality, you did the very best you could. We all do, but we're not experts. And one thing about grief I learned is I never knew anybody that studied it in advance. You wait till life happens to you, and then you start to learn. And half the battle in grieving and mourning successfully, and I'll state this forever, half the battle is education. So half is the mourning and grieving, but the other half is understanding what grieving is all about. So if you understand it, and that's what I hope this is going to help, you'll have a little understanding of when to get sidetracked on certain days, that it's just part of the journey. Grief is a journey, and it's unpredictable, okay? We have the right to go back and forth in our grieving, and I'm sure you've done this back and forth. Some days making progress, and others seemingly slipping back. And then people ask me, what do you mean seemingly slipping back? Once you start to grieve, it's all forward movement. If you take nothing else out of this, take this one. Once you start to grieve, it's all forward movement. So if you have a good day, that's forward movement. If you have a semi-good day, that's forward movement. If you have a bad day, that's forward movement, because it's necessary part of the healing. And if you have a tsunami day, that's the best healing day you can ever have, but you're going to feel bad. So I say to people, if you have that bad emotional day, that tsunami day, when you survive it, and you will, because you already have, is just say to yourself, that was a good healing day. I know when I studied with Alan, excuse me, I'm just going to get some water. When I studied with Alan, he says, if you can't describe this theme about seemingly slipping back, you cannot work with me. Because so many grief facilitators in North America will not talk about this going forward as a continuous movement. He says people will not understand. When they're having a bad day, they're going backwards. No, they're not. They're not going back. You don't go backwards. It's always forward movement. So I'm getting evangelical a little bit. And Lori has seen that before. This is from Cincinnati Children's Hospital, one of the best hospitals in the US. And they wrote a Mourners Bill of Rights for parents and adult family members, and one for children and teens. And the one for parents and adults, I just chose a couple here. I have the right to be sad and cry without worrying what other people think. You have the right to cry. And you have the right to cry wherever you want. Now, I know some of us will say, well, I don't want to embarrass other people. I was in the grocery store my wife and I used to shop at, and I was looking at this item that she and I were going to make a dinner from. And I started to cry, and this lady that was there not too far from me, this was before physical distancing, she actually came up to me and said, "Are you okay?" And I said what I usually recommend you to say, "No, I'm not. I'm struggling. I'm having problems. I'm mourning." And she said, "It gets better." And she said, "Can I give you a hug?" And anybody that knows me, if you ask me that, I'm going to take it. So, and she said, "It's going to be good. You're going to be okay." It takes time. So I have the right to make decisions for myself. My grief doesn't mean that I don't want to be involved. Boy, we get a lot of families that start telling their people that are hurting what to do. I actually get people calling me when I'm working with someone to say, "What are you doing to them because they're getting worse?" And I said, "Yeah, they are. They're going to get worse before they get better." That's just like, anybody ever clean a room? If you've ever cleaned a room, it doesn't get cleaned by itself. You have to take everything out, put it on air, start putting it where it goes. So that's really what this is kind of about, right? You have the right to make decisions for yourself. If you want to stay home at Christmas and you just want to be alone, you have the right to do that. And if your parent or your kids are saying, "We're coming to get you no matter what," I know one lady that rekeyed her house to keep her son out because she didn't want to leave at Christmas. And he says, "Well, I'm coming over anyway." And he did, and she did rekey the house. And he had to go back home. And later in the day, she actually called him and said, "Okay, now if you come and get me, I'd be happy to go." So a little bit of joy in there from time to time, right? I have the right to be angry because my loved one died. You have every right to be angry. Anger is part of the grieving process. I've never seen anyone that didn't at least get irritated, elevated to frustrated. Most people nowadays say, "I never get angry." Who gets angry? I threw a can opener across my kitchen after my wife died one night because I couldn't get a recipe to work, and I had to call a plumber. And at the time I said, "I'm never telling anybody that." That was one of my favorite stories because we're human, right? I have the right to enjoy my life without feeling guilty. So as you're healing, as you're starting to feel better, and you're going to laugh, you're going to start laughing, you can start enjoying life, you may experience what we call joy guilt. I just finished writing a paper last year on guilt. I think I came up with 17 varieties of guilt. But the hardest one for people is joy guilt, because they're saying, "Well, maybe it's too early. Maybe I shouldn't be feeling this way yet because I haven't mourned enough for the person who died." When in reality, what do you think the person who died would want for you? Seriously, would they not want you to laugh and love and doesn't mean you're not remembering them? Well, one thing we just don't seem to understand, we've lost the physical presence of the person who died, but you haven't lost the relationship, the emotional one. You haven't lost the spiritual one. You have memories, you have pictures. To lose that physical presence is very tough, but you still have a relationship. Some of you are probably still talking to your loved one, and some people do that for a while. Some people do it for a long time. They'll just on any given day, they'll just check in and say, well, your little situation in my life here, I need your help. So certainly don't see anything wrong with that. Joy guilt though can be huge, but if it happens, just realize, that's part of the process. Is you're expected to get back to a life that you can enjoy yourself. So this is one of the best articles I came across. It's from Psychology Today, which is a magazine I tend to read, and it was called the Mourners' Bill of Rights. And they said, this is a few of theirs. You have the right to ignore or incorporate any or all of the mountains of advice you will get. Now, I know you've been getting advice. I know I got it too. Some of it was very good. I had the joy of meeting Linda Hay years ago, who helped me with my grief. And as a matter of fact, without Linda, I wouldn't be doing this today, because she and I started Bereavement Support and Education Ottawa many years ago. You have the right to say no, thank you. You do not have to say yes when people start inviting you out. Because if you don't feel physically capable of doing those things, just say to them, no, but you know what, thank you, and don't stop asking. Don't stop asking me, but I may be times when I'm able to do that. So you have the right to grieve for whatever you have lost, including things you never had but ache for, like phantom limb pain. This one fascinated me when I read it. You have the right to grieve for whatever you have lost. I know people, when a family member that they've been disoriented or away from, when they die, the grief is as solid as if they were there. And then they say, why am I grieving someone I don't love? I said, because at some point you did love them, but at this point in your life, you're hoping that things could have been reconciled and you had a future, and now you don't. So that's often will explain something like that. You also have, by the way, secondary losses. So when a person dies, the primary loss is the big loss. That's so hard when they first die, and you're going through the funeral and you're going through all of those things. But as time starts to progress, after that couple of weeks where everybody goes back to their normalities in their lives, and you're kind of on your own, the hardest thing is what we call secondary losses. So secondary losses are all the roles that person did, all the things they did, all the things they said that you no longer have, and you need to grieve every one of those losses. So if they did the cooking, if they did the snow shoveling, if they did the gardening, and you have to realize grief can be seasonal. Right now, there's a lot of people grieving because the garden centers are opening. I know it was just that one this morning. So there's people out there that are going, yeah, but my husband used to do that, or my wife was such a good gardener. And then all of a sudden they thought they're doing really well. And this stuff, there's another, like a second wave of emotion coming through. And that's normal. It's just, could be fishing, could be, how many people are grieving now not being able to go to their cottage? So grief doesn't have to just be death. It can be the loss of anything. I have a cottage I like. Every year I go up in April and put the wharf in, do this and do that. But you can't go there now because you can't cross the border. Apparently they're going to be lightening that up, but we're not sure. So this is all, I don't think I've ever seen in grief, the expression, I have a special friend whose granddaughter said, in all my life, I've never seen anything like this. And she's 17. So I was thinking of that, and I was going to respond back, I'm 72, and in all of my life, I've never seen anything like this. You just have had, it's like you've had everything taken away. And two words I really dislike. I don't like old normal, and I don't like new normal. What an awful way to discount or dismiss grief, right? The life you knew has been torn away from you when you have a death. If it's your dad, if it's your son, if it's your grandmother, your life you knew is gone. There is no normal to go back to. There's some stuff you'll retain. And to call something new normal, that's just dismissive. You're in transition right now. So what you had, what you're going to have, the future you, right now you're in transition. then transition is psychological. It takes time. You've got to deal with so many things. So it's important to understand that. Secondary losses are huge because you may have to get someone to fill in to do those things that that person did for you, or you may have to do them yourself. So you have the right to ask people to bring you pizza. I wrote that, actually. I changed the word. You have the right to ask others for help. And I don't know why we don't do this very well, although if I look back at my life history, I'm not very good at asking people for help. I'm really not. I'll help other people, but I don't ask them. And what came out of my losses over the years was I started asking people for help. And I had two of them actually say to me, "Thank goodness you finally asked us for help. We've been waiting." So you're actually damaging relationships if you're always helping others, but you don't allow others to help back. I don't know if you've read Tuesdays with Maury, but Tuesdays with Maury is a book everybody should read about how as we age, and we need to have people helping us to allow ourselves to let the community in to give us some assistance. It was a very, very good movie with Jack Lemmon. I'm old, right? So Jack Lemmon is an actor I know. You have the right to your own definition of grief. For someone else, the loss may have some unknowable reason. It might be a journey, a blessing, a teachable moment, whatever, but it doesn't have to be any of those things for you, okay? This is whatever you decide it's going to be. Here's another very important one. You have the right not to feel or believe, to be comforted by any of the following. I wish I could see your hands right now. How many of you have heard he's in a better place? The day of my wife's funeral, when I drove back home to my house, my neighbor came across and said, "Sorry I missed the funeral, but I was running errands." And she handed me an envelope. And she said, "I just wanted you to know there's lots of fish in the sea." And I was holding the urn. And I was a little numb at the time. And at this time, I didn't think much of it. When I told Alan about that, when I started my training, he said, "She meant well." I said, "Really?" He said, "People that will get on your," as I say, you got one nerve left and they're getting on it. People mean well. Most people mean well. They're not doing these things to hurt you, but they don't know what to do because we live in a grief avoidance society right now. So living in a grief avoidance society, people don't know what to do or what to say. Go back 2 generations, people knew how to grieve. We used to have wakes, we used to have services in the home, and then got all institutionalized. And we don't do this very well anymore, right? His work here was done. She's in your heart. It's a blessing. It's no one's fault. One of probably the worst one of all is time heals all wounds. I'm sure you've heard that one. Time alone does not heal grief. It's time and what you do with it. So maybe attending with bereaved families, maybe searching out a grief therapist. I'm a grief educator. I'm not a grief counselor. Maybe having a special friend. Oh my goodness, if you've got a friend that knows how to listen, it may not be your spouse. It may not be someone in your family. It could be someone outside. I hope everybody has a good listener. If you're a good listener, you know, because you're popular. People are always trying to talk to you, right? You have the right to buzz around, filling your life with activities and people so you don't have to feel a thing. What do you think of that? You have the right to do it, right? My recommendation, don't do it. You can be busy. You can stay involved in things, but not to the point where you delay your grief. Because if you delay your grief, it's just going to augment and get worse, right? I had a client a couple of years ago, and they would go to work all day, leave work, go to Carlingwood, walk around Carlingwood till the mall closed, take about 4 coffees from Tim Hortons, drive around all over the city till midnight, exhausted. They go back home, going into a house they didn't want to go into, getting into a bed they didn't want to get into, get up in the morning totally fatigued and do it all over again, and did it for 6 months. And they were sent to me because they were in the hospital and they needed help. And we finally worked on that and got that kind of, but they needed to be busy so they could avoid thinking about the loss, right? You have the right to feel what you can feel when you feel it. Be numb when you're numb. Seek comfort when you can stand to. Sometimes a deep fog of grief can make all intimacy too painful. Okay? You have the right not to move on temporarily. And I've been trained in identifying with people when they're frozen, because some people will say, I don't want to move on. And that's fine for a little while. That's fine. You know, you don't have to be, like I say, clearing out closets or anything else until the time is appropriate. You don't have to rush that stuff. But when you get delayed grief to the point where you're not moving forward, you're not feeling any life. And I'm sure your loved one wouldn't want that. They would want you to be doing things, right? You have the right to feel complete, utter hopelessness and despair. Why isn't that lovely? You have the right to feel complete, not just utter hopelessness, complete, utter hopelessness and despair, and to say out loud over and over that we'll never get better. You will never feel better without everybody slushing you. I had someone recently, they said to me, and we were just talking, they said to me, you know, I'll shorten one of the words, I've never been this effing tired in my whole life. I'm just ready to effing kill myself. And then I looked at her and she said, I can't believe I used that word. I said, what word? And she said it again. And I said, that's 3 times. She said, I've never used that once in my life. So I said, does that make me a bad person? I said, not at all. It makes you a human being. I mean, I don't recommend you go around the rest of your life using that, but the reality, she said, that actually felt good. She said, I'm going to be damned to hell for that. I said, I very much doubt it. I would certainly hope not, anyway. You have the right to eat or sing or pray or say whatever you want. But just be careful in some spots, right? You have the right to be changed. The person you were before the death of your loved one is gone, right? We know that, they're gone. You are now someone else. And you don't know who yet, but you're going to discover it. And it's your right to find out. Okay? And then the last little list are these ones I've written over the years, because people keep coming up with these things. And you have the right to grieve even when others think you should be over it. I don't know how many times I've heard, aren't you over it yet? And I wrote another paper last year, and I think I had 27 learnings around that. Why would people say that? Aren't you over it yet? Because we live in a grief avoidance society. Nobody understands how long it takes. And I mean, every problem on TV is solved in 15-second sound bites, right? People don't know how long it takes. And then people will say, well, after a year, everything's going to be okay. Once you get to that year, everything's going to be okay. Well, actually, no. For some of you, you'll be fine before a year's over. Some of you, the year doesn't mean a darn thing. All it means is you've had all your firsts. So you've had a first anniversary, a first birthday, a first this, a first. Just because it's a first doesn't mean I think one of my worst years I had with Suzanne was my third. For some reason, I will say that to people. They said, I don't understand why I'm feeling that this year. I said, tell me what's been going on in your life. There might be something going on, but there's no guarantee that you're not going to feel something down the road. Matter of fact, I look forward to some feelings I'm going to have down the road. If I go to a wedding, one of Suzanne's friends, and she's not there, it's sad. But I talk to people when I'm going and say, can I sit with you guys? And I might have to excuse myself. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Nothing wrong with being human, right? You have the right to have an occasional pity party. Anybody ever do that? Get a pity party? Mine is usually a big chocolate bar. one of the $2.50 ones. I'm not supposed to eat chocolate, so I'm type 2. But the odd time, and my doctor says it's okay occasionally, just don't overdo it. You have the right to search for isolation for a while. You can actually say to your family, time out. I need some time alone, so please don't call, don't. By the way, if you've got toxic people in your family that keep calling you and telling you you're not doing things right, stop answering the phone. Because if I was counseling you one-on-one, that would be a rule. You cannot answer the phone with toxic people because it's going to destroy all healing that you're doing, and they have no idea what they're talking about. In some cases, if somebody read National Enquirer and came up with 81 rules to heal or something, and it's just craziness, right? And then my last one before the question and answer period, because Lori knows me. This is the first time I haven't been kind of given the time thing. This is great. We have to do it this way from now on, Lori. You have the right to wear black if you want. Now, that doesn't mean everybody should come when we get back for our support and share nights wearing black. That doesn't mean you have the right to wear black if you want, but you can also wear any other color you want during the time you are grieving. You can be like a rainbow if you want. You can be polka dot if you want. But so many people think, you have to wear black or I have to do, there are no behavioral rules except I would not want you hurting yourself or hurting other people. I could go on for an hour just with the sad stories of people who are grieving that don't allow their kids to see their grandparents anymore because they're all kinds of things like that. It's awful. It's just ridiculous, actually. But life is hard and it's sometimes very, very unfair. So I've kind of made as long as I'm able to do this, and as long as Bereaved Families is around, I just see myself doing this. So if you have questions, hey, Lori, I'm over 5 minutes.
It's amazing. I can't believe you actually made the time. Like, it's amazing. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.